Alright, so we're back for part 3. This Teryx rebuild. The saga continues. Thought I was done, but if you watched the end of the last video, you saw that right at the end there, we actually lost steering. So what ended up happening is the steering rack took a bump, and that's kind of all it took. It must have been damage from the initial accident. I had inspected it previously, but you know, it seemed like everything was okay on the steering rack, but obviously something internally was already on its way out. So it only took one little bump to kind of throw out that steering rack. So here we are today. We're replacing the steering rack. Hopefully that's the last of this repair, and this thing will be good to go from here on out. So the first thing we're doing today is we're going to double check that our tie rod clearance between the end of the tie rod and the wheel. So already on this machine we have the heavy duty automotive style tie rods, and I took the wheel spacer out already to test the fitment, see what clearance we have between the tire and that tie rod. And I knew it was close, and as you can see, it's real close. So I want to double check with the new tie rods that come with the Rackboss heavy duty steering rack that we're still going to have clearance. It might actually end up being a little more clearance than we have there now. So we'll get this tire back off, and we'll first start by test fitting the tie rod end on the spindle there, make sure we have clearance before we continue on and actually replace the whole steering rack. Okay, so I got the new tie rod end installed, and it looks like we're going to be okay. It is pretty close without the wheel spacers, but it's actually slightly more clearance than we had before. So I think we're going to be okay there. Just got everything kind of loosely in there. Wheel on without the wheel spacers, because there are certain areas that I run that I actually have to remove the wheel spacers to be able to get through some tight fitting gates. So we'll be good even in those situations. So we'll continue on, and we'll get the steering rack out, and we'll take a minute to compare that to the new SuperATV Rackboss 2.0 heavy duty steering rack, and then we'll get that one in. Okay, so looking at the way this steering rack is mounted, you got two bolts. On the bottom you got one here, one on the other side in basically the same position, and then you've got one up top here. And that one up top, I believe the nut on the back side is actually welded on, but these two lower ones, the nuts on the back spin, so you'll need 2 wrenches to take the bottom ones out. And then if we look from this side, I think it's going to be easier if we loosen up that brake line. So take out some of the bolts that are mounting that brake line, just so we get a little flexibility there. Let's move that out of the way, because it's going to kind of interfere with getting to the nut on the back side for that steering rack. Okay, so that's one out. On the driver's side lower bolt here, just use a short 17mm socket and a long 3/8 ratchet wrench on the bolt side, and then on the nut side just used 17mm combination wrench just to hold the nut while I turn the bolt out with the socket wrench. So one down, 2 to go. That one was pretty easy. Okay, so bolt 2 is out. That was the top bolt where the nut is welded in on the frame, and that one was a little more difficult. It's quite a bit of blue Loctite on this bolt, so it kind of fought the whole way. But and I had to use a long 1/2-inch breaker bar to get it started, and then a long 1/2-inch ratchet wrench with a short 17mm socket on it to get the rest of the way out. Definitely helped to have a friend on the other side holding the ratchet on the head of the bolt, because it, you know, without that it wanted to pop off. But together we got that out without too much fuss, just a little bit of effort there, but that one came out pretty easily. number 3's out. Again, it's really just a Loctite that fights you, but a short 17mm socket and a 17mm open-ended wrench on the nut, and really just comes right out, not too bad. Now I'm going to try to pull it this way towards the passenger side. Actually made it a little bit easier that the input shaft actually was really just popped right out of there, so that actually kind of made it easier to take out of here. Okay, so what it looks like happened here is the bearing itself just fell apart. You know, probably from that impact, it probably had almost pushed all those ball bearings all the way out of that bearing, I would assume, and then it just took one last little hit to just pop it the rest of the way out, because you can see the inner race here on the shaft, and then the snap ring is actually still inside of here holding the outer race of that bearing in there. So even though it didn't seem to have play when I was moving the shaft side to side when I did the rest of the work, didn't really see any play that way, but maybe this bearing was already damaged. It just took that one last little hit to pop those bearing balls out of there. Could probably put this back together with a new bearing, but we're gonna definitely go ahead and replace it. But if I was in a pinch, I could maybe get away with just repairing it, but that's not what we're gonna do. We're gonna upgrade it today. Okay, so a quick comparison here between the stock Kawasaki Teryx steering rack and the SuperATV Rackboss 2.0 steering rack, the upgraded steering rack available for the Kawasaki Teryx, which we have available on the website, jbbatv.com. Make sure you add it to your cart to see the final price. The coupon code will automatically be applied, as it is to any SuperATV products on our website. The coupon will automatically be applied, and you'll see that final price in your cart. So anyway, some of the differences that I noticed right away, if we look here, the SuperATV steering rack has this heavy-duty lock ring here, which locks the input shaft in and bearing into the housing there, versus it's kind of hard to see on this old one here, but there's actually a snap ring there that holds that assembly and holds the bearing and holds the input shaft in. So it's just kind of a little snap ring, which works, but you know, this heavy-duty ring probably would have prevented a failure like we had on this one, where basically the bearing got pushed out of the housing. This heavy-duty retaining ring may have helped in that instance. The other differences we notice is that the SuperATV rack has the grease fitting built in, so it's serviceable. You can add some grease in there. There definitely was a little bit of water contamination in the grease in this OEM steering rack, so having the ability to add some fresh grease in there may have helped to extend the life of that. And then lastly, the next big thing that I noticed is that the diameter of the shafts on these two steering boxes are different. So on the OEM, we have about 22 millimeters, a 22 millimeter shaft, and then on the Rackboss, we have a 25 millimeters. So it's about 3 millimeters bigger, about an 1/8 inch bigger shaft on the SuperATV one. And you notice this inner tie rod joint is pretty common automotive style inner tie rod joint there. And on the OEM, this was actually sort of an upgraded tie rod that I had installed previously. This is an automotive style as well, but you can see, because of the smaller shaft and the smaller threads, the threads on the end of this shaft are 14 millimeters, so the compatible automotive style inner tie rod is actually pretty small. It's pretty narrow. You can see how much it necks down here. It's pretty tiny, but this is about the best upgrade you can get for a stock setup anyway, without going something totally custom. But here, because SuperATV steering rack has 16mm threads on the shaft, it fits a much larger automotive style inner tie rod joint. So overall, looks pretty awesome. Definitely a nice upgrade over the OEM steering rack, and now it's time to get this installed. So these splines. If you can, let me try to guide this up roughly into position, and then you can try to get that shaft started. And once you get the shaft started, then if you can help me hold the rack so I can get a bolt in. Yeah. Okay, ready?
Yep.
That. Okay.
All you see is my hand.
Okay, hold it there for a second. Okay, it's not going anywhere. So this flange on the SuperATV rack is thicker than the flange on the OEM rack, and it puts the head of this bolt close enough to the diff here that I can't get the same 3/8 ratchet and short 17mm socket in here without the head of the ratchet hitting the diff. So in my case here, I got one of these low profile sockets that I can put a ratcheting wrench on there, and it gives me just enough clearance to get in here now and ratchet that on. And then on the back side, the new hardware that comes with the rack, the nut takes an 18mm wrench instead of a 17mm like the OEM hardware required. So if you don't have one of these low profile sockets, it's not impossible, but it's definitely going to be a slower job as you get just quarter turns on there with a regular socket or an open-end wrench or something. You can get it, but definitely will be a little slower. Okay, so we got the steering rack all bolted in and starting to put the tie rods on. What I did is I just took a rough measurement of the length of the other tie rods and tried to set these as close as possible to that. So the measurement from inside here to the center of the tie rod was about 15 inches for me, so pretty close there. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's in the ballpark. It's a good starting point, and allow us to get it on the wheels, down on the ground, and we can do the final alignment afterwards. But I think we're in the ballpark now. I'm gonna finish putting this together. Okay, so I forgot to film a proper outro, but just to sum things up a little bit, is a steering rack replacement on a Kawasaki Teryx a difficult job? No, it really isn't. It's pretty straightforward. You hear a lot of talk on Facebook, on forums and things like that of how much of a nightmare it is to replace the steering rack of the Kawasaki Teryx. It really isn't that bad. The worst part is that those 3 bolts do have quite a bit of Loctite on them, and they're fine pitch thread, so it takes a while to get those nuts off, and you're fighting that Loctite the whole time. But really straightforward job. Super happy to have the SuperATV Rackboss 2.0 rack on the Teryx now. A great upgrade over the OEM rack, and should be a good rack for years to come. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.